Hello, I'm Kristian Bayu with student number 106, and here on behalf of the group 8, I would like to say a few words before we carry on to our analysis. First of all, we would like to thank the Lord, God, because of His grace and mercy, we are able to complete of making this video. And then we would like to thank Mr. Netra for being the mentor, the tutor, and lecturer for this subject. And then in this video, our group will analyze about a poem written by Elizabeth Bishop with the title One Art. Now, this video is made to fulfill the final test mark on poetry analysis. And this video, the analysis is based on three aspects. First one is the poem structure. The second is the figures of speech within the poem. And then the value that is based on the historical aspect and its relevance with nowadays. I think that would be all for the introduction, and we'll be moving on to the analysis. Right, so before we begin into moving on to our analysis, let us first listen to the poem itself in order to understand more about the poem. Please allow me to read the poem. One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster. Places, names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of three loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost two cities, lovely ones, and faster. Some realms I owned, two rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, joking voice, a gesture I love. I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like write it like disaster. Now, after we have listened to the poem being read by me, uh, now we come to the analysis part. First, it is the analysis of the structure. We start at line breaking analysis. Now, line breaking analysis is a technique that is used by the poem by separating lines. Uh, Let us start from the first stanza. We can see, based on the punctuation mark, all of them belongs in a single complex sentence. But let us pay attention to the second and the third line of the stanza. There we can see that they belong to one sentence, of course, but the author purposely separates them, thus creating a suspension of meaning in the second line and then being explained by the third one. In the screen, in the video, you can see that the second line, so many things seem filled with the intent, but the intent of what? And that gave us a suspension, and it was finally being enlightened by the third line to be lost, that their loss is no disaster. Now, this suspension of meaning results a poetic expression within the poem. That's for the first stanza. And then uh, for the rest of the stanza, actually followed the same suspension of meaning pattern. But let us see them one by one. Next, in the second stanza, the first line, accept the fluster, could refer to the previous sentence, lose something every day. But if we read closely, it actually refers to the second line of the stanza. Therefore, again, creating the suspension of meaning, thus creating a poetic expression. Then moving on to the third stanza, if we look closely, based on the punctuation marks still, uh, the stanza consists of two sentences, but our attention must go to the first sentence, which the author breaks into three separate lines, spread them equally throughout the third stanza. But we can also view them as three sentences with one line as independent sentence from the other. Uh, but still, it consists the same break between the second and the third line, same as the previous one. Therefore, either we view them as two sentences or three, both of them create the suspension of meaning, thus creating a poetic expression. And then moving on to the fourth stanza, still based on the punctuation mark, we will see that there are three sentences within this stanza. However, our attention will go to the second one, which the line break occurs. We can sense the suspension of meaning on the first line, and look, my last, or this was purposely broken by the author to create the poetic expression. And then we go to the line break in the fifth stanza, which occurred in the second sentence, as seen in the video, uh, which was separated into the first and the second line of the stanza. From this break, we can interpret the stanza into two meanings, actually. The first one, if we read them as two separate sentences, or simply view them as three lines, as shown here, the phrase and faster can refer to the first sentence, I lost two cities, meaning that she has lost even vaster cities. And then the second one, the second meaning that we can view, if we read the phrase and faster and connect it to the second line as a sentence, it gave us the meaning that the realm in the second line was vaster than the two cities in the first line. Uh, to us, this might be more comprehensible and tolerable in meaning, as well in reading it. It will give us the suspension of meaning and give us the poetic expression as described in the as being exampled in the previous stanza. That would be more tolerable in the poetic expression. And then moving on to the final stanza, the sixth stanza of the poem, which consists quite which is quite interesting because as a holistic, it consists of two sentences, as we mark here. But the author break these sentences into four lines. The first sentence spread across the first and the second line, and then the second sentence spread from the second line to the fourth line. Let us give attention to the second sentence, in the second line, because obviously the first sentence, if we read it, need to be comprehended as holistic. And then within this third and fourth line, we think it can be dependent sentence, but pay attention to the phrase, it's evidence. Similar to the previous stanza, it can either stick with the previous one, the second line, or see it as a holistic and connect it to the latter, the third line, which gave us two different meanings. But we would get a more comprehensible meaning if we do the latter. Thus, it is creating a suspension of meaning, which leads to a poetic expression, just like the pattern in the previous stanza. And that would be all from me about line breaking. Thank you for listening, and the next structure analysis will be brought by my friend.
Hello, my name is Nena Kandouw with student number 091, and I will continue presenting about the structure analysis of the poem One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. So the first structure of this poem is the stanza break. And stanza is a poetic form of some lines, and this poem has 6 stanzas, and the first stanza is in line 1 to 3, and the second stanza is in line 4 to 6, and the third stanza is in line 7 to 9, and the fourth stanza is in line 10 to 12, and the fifth stanza is in line 13 to 15, and the sixth stanza is in line 16 to 19, which is in 4 lines. So this poem consists of 5 terzats, or also known as terza rima. Terza rima is a 3-line stanzas which is borrowed from Italian poetry, and this poem consists of 5 3-line stanzas. There is also another term which is called quatrain. Quatrain is a 4-line stanza, and it is borrowed from Persian poetry, and this poem consists of just one quatrain, which is a 4-line stanza that is in the 6th stanza or the last stanza in the poetry. Moving on to other structure, which is line, and this poem consists of 19 lines, which is divided to 6 stanzas, which I have mentioned before. And for the rhyme structure, this poem is divided into 2 types of rhymes. The first rhyme is ABA, and the second rhyme is ABAA. The rhyme ABA is for the terza rima, or the 3-line stanza, and the rhyme ABAA is for the 4-line stanza or quatrain. So the sound of phoneme which is found in the poem, such as master, disaster, fluster, faster, faster, and many more, is represented as A. Meanwhile, the sound of phoneme ant is represented as B. Moving on to other structure, which is repetition, and this poem consists of 3 repetitions. The first one is found from the words "The art of losing isn't hard to master," which is in line 1, 6, and 12, and the other word is disaster, which is found in line 3, 9, and 15. So the last structure of this poem is refrain. Refrain is the lines that are repeated again at some distance in the poem. So for this poem, the refrain is found in words "The art of losing isn't hard to master," which is repeated in some distance in the poem, and that is why "The art of losing isn't hard to master" is the refrain of the poem. And that would be all from me about the structure analysis. Thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Angga Sanjaya and my student number is 19015411086. Now I will present to you about our analysis on the literary device or figures of speech. Literary devices are tools that enable the writers to present their ideas, emotions, and feelings with the use of these devices. The writers used some literary device or figure of speech in this poem. The first one is metaphors and similes. The concept of loss is itself used as an extended metaphor. encompassing the loss of time which can be found in the second stanza, and then memory and place in the third stanza, as well as in addition to inanimate objects that was written throughout the fourth and fifth. Artistry and artistic practice are also used as an extended metaphor, so that loss is treated as an art form to be practiced, mastered, and learned. Alliteration. The phrase losing farther, losing faster, in line 1 of the third stanza, it is uses alliteration, repeating both beginning L and F sounds. The phrase look my loss uses alliterative L sounds that can be found in the first line of the fourth stanza. The next one is assonance. The phrase the art of losing isn't hard uses assonance, with its repeating long A sounds that can be found in line 1, 6, and 12. The phrase losing you in the first line of the sixth stanza uses assonance with two repeating U sounds. And the next one is irony. The speakers claim to believe that loss need not to be an upsetting or impactful experience, but it's clearly impacted by a variety of upsetting losses. Depending on one's reading, this may be a case of either dramatic or verbal irony. The speaker may not realize, even though the reader does, that they themselves are affected by loss. This would be an example of dramatic irony. However, the speaker may be using sarcasm, at least towards the end of the poem, in which case this is an instance of verbal irony. And the next one is personification. Lost objects and concepts are personified and imbued with intentionality in the phrase. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost or to be lost, which can be seen in the first stanza and second and the third line. And the next one is hyperbole. The author states in the fifth stanza that she has lost geographical places, rivers, cities, and even continents. It is hyperbole. Readers are not meant to assume that the speaker has literally lost an entire continent, but rather to understand that their distance from certain places feels as dramatic as a loss. The next one is imagery. It is used to make readers perceive things with their five senses. For example, in the second stanza, I've lost 2 keys the hour badly spent. Then in the fourth stanza, I lost my mother's watch. And look, my last. And next to last, of 3 loved houses went. The next one is enjambment. It is a thought or a clause that does not come to an end at a line break, rather moves over the next line. Well, this was already explained comprehensively in the line-breaking sections of our analysis session. But I would like to give you an example, which is in the fourth stanza. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last, or next to last, of 3 loved houses went. This is called an enjambment. The next one is symbolism. Symbolism means the use of symbols to signify ideas and qualities by giving them symbolic meanings different from the literal meanings. For example, lost door keys in the second stanza and watch in the fourth stanza symbolize the hour misspent in life. And at the same time, that watch also symbolizes her relationship with her mother. And that in the sixth stanza, the word you is the symbol of her lost love. And the next one is metonymy and synecdoche. In the fourth stanza, the mother's watch refers literally to a watch, but also can be understood as a metonymic representation of the mother herself, or else of the relationship between the speaker and the mother. Yes, and that would be all from me. Thank you for listening and thank you for your attention.
Hello, my name is Susanto and my student number is 098 and I will present to you about our analysis on the theme. The theme of this poem is the inevitability and pain of loss. One art poem explores the idea that nothing lasts forever and that loss is impossible to avoid. The speaker remarks that so many things seem filled with the intent or to be lost, emphasizing that the loss of many things is natural part of life. However, the speaker claims that with practice people can learn to accept and even master the art of losing. At first, the speakers evokes everyday losses readers can relate to. For example, most people have lost their keys or wasted an hour of time. Then moving on to something on a bigger scale like losing abstract concepts like place and names and where it was you meant to travel. She also loses items of emotional value such as her mother's watch and three love houses. Therefore, the poem broadens the idea of loss, relating it to life, changes that are inevitable with the passage of time. Yet the speaker continues to describe these losses with the same casual tone, suggesting that even these major losses are manageable. So, however, the speaker doesn't actually seem to be an expert at this art as she claims she fears losing in a way that suggests she hasn't mastered anything at all. In the end, one art suggests that everything in life is transient while also showing the struggle involved in coping with the grief that loss entails, meaning or value. So, one art by Elizabeth Bishop is about the loss of realms, continents, and finally and most devastatingly of a person. Is no small or light things, but the importance of loss. It is something unavoidable, immense, and also profoundly ordinary. The poem illuminates the pain of losing a loved one. However, Elizabeth Bishop tried to convince the reader and herself, of course, that certain things inherently want to be lost and that when they do get lost, it's nothing to cry about because it was bound to happen in the first place. So that will be all from me. Thank you for listening and watching.
Hello, my name is Hizkia Sihombing, student number 19015411102, and I will give you our analysis on historical background of this poem and its correlation with nowadays. So to begin with, we can concur that the poem One Art is the most poetic way to write an autobiography. Elizabeth Bishop successfully turns her pain and sequences of consecutive tragedies into one of the best poems in the English language, and is compared to the works of W. H. Auden, Dylan Thomas, Theodore Roth, Sylvia Plath, and more. And the second stanza, Bishop told us about the first significant loss in her life, the death of her father when she was 8 months old, and the subsequent loss of her grieving mother, who was confined permanently to a mental asylum when Bishop was 5 years old. The word "ye" in Lost Stanza forces us to consider it as a person, in fact, as an irreplaceable entity. Besides her close family, her love life seemed to be full of misadventure as well. In 1951, she traveled to Brazil on a traveling fellowship from Bryn Mawr College, where she met Dota de Macedo Soares and remained there with her for nearly 17 years until Soares committed suicide in 1967. Years later, she met Alice Fessel, the young house secretary in the Kirkland house. Bishop's life and specifically her relationships with these women were kept under wraps. At one point, Bishop instructed Fessel to destroy any evidence of their relationship. She said, I am old-fashioned and believe in discretion and privacy. Later, in the spring of 1975, Fessel had met someone else and was engaged to be married. However, the two did not cease corresponding. Fessel was written into Bishop's will to inherit almost all of her wealth and property and was instructed to carry out an assisted suicide uh, should Bishop's health deteriorate to a certain point. In the years to come, Bishop would find Fessel again and spend her remaining years in her company until a brain aneurysm in 1979 resulted in her death. So what can we learn from her tragic story, her tragic life? Uh, I guess despite complaining and grumbling, the poet showed us how to deal with this tragic life. Indeed, her life was very tragic, but despite that, she saw this as sequences of tragedy and nothing more than a practice of loss. In the end, when another significant loss happened, may a sincere and steadfast smile brighten our gloomy day, just like Ezra Bishop, while we say this to ourselves. Oh, this is no disaster. And that would be all from me regarding to the historical background of the poem and its correlation with nowadays. Thank you so much for listening.
Back with me again. Uh, Now we have come to the conclusion of our analysis. To conclude our analysis, we have found several ways that indicating this poem is indeed poetic, starting from how the author broke the narrative into uh, several stanza, which is known as stanza breaking. And within those stanza, the author purposely broke the sentence into several lines, which is known as line breaking. And then she also used figures of speech throughout the poem and repetition, rhymings within the poem that can suggest that this was in fact poetic. And then this poem is one of the example of our way as human to process grief, to relieve ourselves from the burden of the grief and pretend that it didn't affect us at all, which eventually it did, just as the poem described those lost gradually from something small, like lost keys, to something significant to us, like someone we love. Uh, in the end, it all affects us. No matter how persistent our effort to avoid and ignore and hide those pain and loss, it will remain. We just need to accept it in order to make peace with it. And I think that would be all from us and for the concluding remarks. And in the end, we would like to say thank you to you for listening to our analysis. And we hope that you may learn a thing or two, perhaps, from our analysis. And then, if there's a mistake in our analysis or in a way of presenting it to you, or a misspoken word, perhaps, that we didn't realize, we deeply apologize. And again, we'd say thank you Have a nice day, stay safe, and stay healthy.